Okay. We're going to go ahead and get started with our joint conceptual workshop. So I'll call to order. In our process, in our joint conceptual is that we'll do a presentation by the applicant or staff, and then we'll go to allow comments from each of the BOMA and Planning Commission members. So, accommodations have been made to ensure that the public is able to view the meeting. The public may view the workshop in the following ways: watch the meeting on Franklin TV or the City of Franklin website, watch the live stream through the City of Franklin Facebook and YouTube accounts, attend in person in the boardroom. The public may also watch the meeting on the TV in the lobby. So we've got 3 items on our agenda for tonight, and our target is to wrap up by 6:30. So the first item of business is a discussion of the Franklin zoning ordinance annual update. So Kelly?
Good evening. Can you hear me okay? Thank you. This is the annual update for the zoning ordinance. As you may remember, we had a major update in 2019, and since then we've done an annual update every year so that we can make corrections, keep our ordinance working well and current with community needs. There's just a small list of items for update this year. They include setbacks for older platted subdivisions, appurtenance encroachments into setbacks, some permitted use changes, and changes to preliminary historic zoning commission recommendation process, and a small handful of rezonings. So I'll give you a high-level overview of each of these. The first topic is setbacks for older platted subdivisions. The zoning ordinance has minimum setbacks for each zoning district, but where a plat has different setbacks, those apply, because those setbacks were created when the lot was created, when it was subdivided. And there are a number of reasons why that can happen. The plat might be so old that it predates our zoning ordinance, or it was developed in the county and then it was annexed into the city and assigned one of our zoning districts. There's a number of reasons why that can happen, but there are some older plats that have front yard setbacks, but they don't have side or rear yard setbacks on them. And when that's the case, we refer back to the zoning ordinance. So it creates some unusual building envelopes for some lots when that happens in a handful of older platted subdivisions out there. So staff is proposing that where there is a platted front yard setback but no others, that we would add a specific side and rear yard setback to the zoning ordinance standards so that there is more flexibility for building for those lots, but still maintain a minimum rear yard standard.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Didn't the zoning ordinance a long time ago have a specific side yard and maybe even backyard? I know it had side yard. And so whenever we changed the zoning ordinance several times over the years, we just left that out because it was so specific.
We have some platted subdivisions that don't have those side and rear yard setbacks on the plat.
Oh, on the plat, right.
So when they're not on the plat, our zoning ordinance district standards apply from the zoning ordinance. I know it's kind of complicated to talk about, but there are some that are missing side and rear yard setbacks on the plat where they should be, but they're not there. So what we're proposing is to add a standard such as 10 feet in the side yard and 25 feet in the rear yard. So there's some standard there, because in some districts, like our R1 district, we have a 50-foot setback in the rear yard, but maybe a platted setback for the front yard is 50 feet. So that's already 100 feet of depth that's not buildable for a particular lot. So it's creating some unusual building envelopes for some of the smaller lots. So that's what we're trying to create, is more flexibility for those sorts of situations. It really wouldn't come up if not for the more recent trends in tear downs and rebuilds in some of our older neighborhoods. So the next one is related. It is about appurtenance encroachments into setbacks. And appurtenances are ornamentation or elements that are accessory to a building. And they include things like chimneys, stoops, roof overhangs, bay windows, porches, and decks. And some of our older neighborhoods have buildings, and you can see from this example, that fairly well cover the buildable envelope on the property. So they're built almost to the rear property line. And what we're seeing is that we're seeing a lot of variance requests for screened-in porches in the rear yard. And they can't be accommodated because there's no more room in the backyard. So when we're getting these variance requests, it's really difficult to recommend approval of them when there's nothing really unusual about the lot. And there's not really any opposition from adjacent property owners to allow for a screened-in porch in the backyard. So what we'd like to propose here is to allow an additional encroachment of the appurtenance, which is a screened porch or other element, into the rear yard. So our current ordinance in most districts allow a 6-foot encroachment into the rear yard for an appurtenance, which isn't very deep for a screened porch and not desired by our community members that have been proposing them. So this would extend that amount, perhaps 15 feet into the rear yard, but maintaining a minimum from the rear lot line so that there is distance in the rear yard that is open, that preserves the privacy of the rear yard neighbor, but allows more flexibility for a property owner to enjoy the outdoors in a screened-in porch environment or a backyard deck that we're seeing more and more of as a trend. And what you see in this example is an example of that with a platted 40-foot rear yard setback and a typical request of maybe a 15, 16-foot deep screened porch that's requested into that setback. This example still allows rear yard past that point, so that open area, so it still protects the adjacent privacy.
Kelly, and by definition, does an appurtenance encroachment have to be attached to or part of the main structure?
Yes.
It cannot be a freestanding detached screen
Good
porch,
point.
even a screen enclosure or whatever.
Right, you're right. An appurtenance is attached to the main building. It's accessory to the main structure. So it's something that's extending from that building facade line, for example, like a chimney that extends outward or a box window.
Would this include carports? Because I know in some of the older neighborhoods, I know the previous item you spoke to was about the side yard. And I know there's a couple of areas in Franklin where they're older neighborhoods, and maybe there's 10 feet on one side, but carports have been added on, so they're maybe 2 to 3 feet from the property line. And so if you had a homeowner that, say, wanted to add a carport, for the first item, could it be put on the side, but on this one, could it be put in the back?
Well, so if it's attached to the building, that's part of the building itself, and it needs to maintain the minimum requirements for setbacks. Detached structures are considered accessory structures, and so for this example, a detached carport could be put in the backyard and has a different set of setbacks because accessory structures have a lesser setback than the main principal structure on the site.
Okay.
So currently, when you get requests or when people come to you with screening porch requests or whatever, do you have to send them to BOZA for a variance or just can't do anything?
Currently, the city staff either tells them that it's not permitted to encroach in that far into the rear yard setback, and they may ask to apply for a variance before the Board of Zoning
Yeah,
Appeals.
that's what I was
Mhm.
asking. You probably couldn't hear what I said. I guess I could.
All right, so the next topic, if we're ready to move on, is some proposed changes to the permitted use tables. There's just a few here. The first is to add hospitals and rehabilitation centers to the RC6 and RC12 districts. Those areas are along and near the I-65 corridor. You'll also see a rezoning request later for Williamson Medical Center, and so this is related to that in terms of what their needs are. The second one is to add entrepreneurship and innovation centers and museums to the PD, CI, and commercial districts, and you'll see a couple examples of museums that are requested for rezoning as well as part of this update. The third is to remove group home with 9 to 20 residents from the OR district. Group homes are defined as 9 to 20 residents right now, but what we're going to do is update that definition so that it matches the building code definition of group home. This is different from the group home that state law permits as single-family residential of up to 8 individuals that can be in any single-family residential unit. This is a large amount of people in one dwelling, and the placement of the OR district is next to single-family residential. And we looked at this with the new definition and would like to remove that from the OR district so that it's more refined to the CI district and the PD district. Lastly, in terms of permitted uses, this request came from an alderman to add photography services as a home occupation under the accessory use table. Staff supports that change with some use regulations on it, that it could be inside the dwelling like typical home occupation uses are, and could be outside for exterior photos when the lot size is above 2 acres.
Okay,
and
good.
not taking place in any required setbacks, so that we maintain privacy for adjacent property owners.
What's magical about 2 acres?
It seems like a large enough amount of land so that the backdrop is not someone else's property. That's the main reason.
But every place is different. Somebody could have an acre with open land all around them, or something else that's maybe screened by landscaping, and you wouldn't see anything. So that prohibits somebody that doesn't have that problem. And we're saying one size fits all. I wouldn't agree with that.
Well, if we could say, I do remember a few years ago, we had a problem with someone who was using the outside to do a lot of photography, and it wasn't just, they would be photographing one person. You see, but it was a real difficulty for the people who lived on both sides.
I
that.
understand that, but one size does not fit all. And I don't know how we can make a ruling and allow that to happen when I might have a piece of property that's an acre and you can't see anything from my property. You might just have all screening. You might have evergreens around my entire property. Some people do that on purpose, especially if they're big into photography. They might put something around their property so they have this beautiful backyard and you wouldn't have anything in the backdrop. So that's saying to me one size fits all, and I don't think that's appropriate. I'm just saying.
Well, let me say, how many 1 acre lots do we have in the city of Franklin, period?
Well, could be more than that. It could be less than an acre. I'm saying there are plenty of backyards in this city where you don't see anything.
You know, the acreage is something that we could look at. Home occupation uses are intended to be not noticeable from adjacent properties. They're not intended to add more traffic or other nuisance that might be created with someone operating a commercial business at their place of residence. So we're very careful, especially because part of the requirements for home occupation uses is that it's located either inside the principal building, inside the house, or inside the accessory structure. There's only a couple exceptions, and we added those last year with daycare uses, with childcare at home, that playgrounds could be outside, and also swimming pools for swim lessons, that could take place outside, because we had situations where there were those who wanted to have swim lessons. So we err on the side of protecting the adjacent property owners. So it's something that we could look at, but we would recommend that it be a large area so that there's not potential for someone taking photos and interfering with an adjacent property owner's privacy.
I guess one question I might have is maybe some of that language of the intent of the size. Is there any way that that could maybe be put in there to outline that you can't see it? Because I know when we start looking, I know understand that there was issues in the past, but also kind of looking at the lot sizes in Franklin. I mean, there's not much property over 1 acre that's not over $800,000. And so when you look at who might have to do a couple of portraits outside, maybe they're individual or whatever, just a question.
We can certainly look at that.
I think we need to.
All right, the last substantive text change that's proposed is a procedural one for review by the Historic Zoning Commission. So in 2019, with the major update, we added and formalized a process for the Historic Zoning Commission to review development plans early on in the approval process, where the height, the scale, the setbacks, everything that goes into creating the built environment can have a review by the Historic Zoning Commission prior to those items becoming entitled with a development plan approval. It only applies when it's near a National Register property or a historic resource that's eligible for the National Register. What we'd like to do here is add rezoning review for those rare circumstances when a hillside hilltop overlay comes through or a scenic corridor overlay rezoning request comes through, where they are adjacent to National Register properties and may be impactful of the historic resource with the zoning change.
And this would just be for them to give a recommendation to the body that is going to make the final decision.
Yes, so the
you.
recommendation travels from Historic Zoning to the Planning Commission to the BOMA. Okay, I'll move on to the rezonings.
Okay.
The first is a rezoning to the FFO, the floodway fringe overlay district. Let's see. Can you see my cursor? Okay. There's Liberty Pike, and there's Mac Hatcher Parkway. And you see the area that's in a red hatch that's below that, south of that? That area was updated in the last FEMA update to be included in the 100-year floodplain. So that's now 100-year floodplain, but our zoning district doesn't reflect those boundaries because we haven't made that update. So that's what we would like to do now, is rezone that area to the FFO so that it does what it's supposed to, which is align the zoning district with the 100-year floodplain boundaries.
Okay, question on this. Isn't there a new flood map from FEMA coming out immediately. It's already been shown, but not to us.
I'd have to,
Absolutely, yes, thank you.
Go ahead.
We've talked about it.
It has, there was a public comment period that ended, I believe, back in March. This reach
Is it
of
different?
stream was not affected from memory. I haven't looked at it specifically. It was mainly the Harpeth that, where there was some impact. So that should be adopted towards the end of this year, is based on my conversation with Shannon McCoy.
and when that happens, we'll want to come back again next year and update those boundaries to match the FEMA maps, because that's what the FFO is intended to do, is preserve and protect the floodplain area from development. The next one is the rezoning I mentioned earlier from, this is the Williamson Medical Center property. So there's I-65 and Murfreesboro Road and Carruthers. So this site is zoned CI today, but prior to 2019, the property had what you may remember as the height overlay on it for 12 stories. We eliminated the extra overlay zoning district into RC6 and RC12, but at the time, hospitals weren't a permitted use in that district, so we zoned it CI, understanding that their buildings were already there, but they would like to expand and need the additional height that the CI district does not allow. And so it makes sense in this situation to restore that 12-story height in the RC12 district to allow the additional height with the text amendment that allows hospitals and rehabilitation centers to be in RC12. That would bring that into compliance. The next one is a rezoning from RC6 to CI and HPO. It is at the corner of 11th Avenue North and Glass Street. It is the McLemore House Museum, and the rezoning to CI will bring that into compliance with its use as a museum, and also adding the HPO overlay district to it for historic preservation. The next one is similar. It's on Natchez Street at the corner of 11th Avenue South, across from West Folk Street, and it's another rezoning from R6 to CI and HPO. It is the Merrill Williams House, which is planned to be a heritage center in the Natchez neighborhood. The last rezoning is an alderman request. It is on 2nd Avenue South. It houses the Five Stones Church. Currently, it is zoned CC, and it has been requested that that is rezoned from CC to OR, so a commercial district to an office residential district, which would allow the church to continue operation as it is. This whole area that you see in red is zoned CC. It was once zoned heavy industrial. So at some point, that area was rezoned away from industrial uses to CC, but it doesn't match what's across the street from it with OR. So staff does support that rezoning to align the OR limits along 2nd Avenue North. That's a combination of office and existing residential uses. That's all for the rezonings. The next steps. Tonight we had the joint conceptual workshop, September 23rd. The ordinance update will go before the Planning Commission with a public hearing, and then on to the October 12th BOMA work session, October 26th for first reading, and then a public hearing and second reading on November 23rd, with third and final reading scheduled for December 14th with an effective date of January 1st, 2022, to align with the previous text amendment that came through that addressed floodplain.
Oh, a question.
Yes.
Do we have a meeting on October the 26th? Isn't that Election Day? But we don't have a meeting, correct?
Okay.
So,
I will relook at these dates. Thank you. Okay, we will probably put this BOMA first reading on October 12th, so it's the same night as the work session, so that we can line up those dates. It's important that we line up
Okay,
dates of text
sure.
amendments due to vesting laws. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Peterson. Okay, next is the Franklin subdivisions annual update, and Victoria Hensley is going to present on that. She's our newest planner with the Planning and Sustainability Department.
Hello. So this is a subdivision update, an annual update for the subdivision regulations. So the subregs went through an update with the zoning ordinance update in 2019. This is just the first update since the adoption in 2019. It's just a minor cleanup of the previous update. And the subdivisions regulate the subdivision of land into 2 or more lots in the city. And it is the Planning Commission's role to maintain the document and keep regulations up to date and working well. So over the last year and a half, staff has identified 3 minor updates that are needed. The first is to remove the vesting section for final plats. Vesting does not apply to final plats, but does apply to preliminary plats. So this is just a correction in the subregs to be consistent with state law. The second minor update is adding language back for clarity on side lot lines. So we are proposing that they should be approximately at right angles or radial to street lines in order to have lots that are generally rectangular with regularly shaped building envelopes. And then finally, clarification that if someone takes an instrument to the Williamson County Office of Register of Deeds to divide a property, it does not require the city to accept it as a buildable lot. Because the city has standards based on zoning districts that lots must meet in order to be considered buildable. And the next steps for this, we will be bringing it to the Planning Commission at the September 23rd meeting for approval.
Okay?
Okay, thank
Great.
you.
Thank you, Victoria. And the next item is for discussion of the Williamson County Growth Plan update, inclusive of the Franklin Urban Growth Boundary. Emily, I failed to ask if anyone had comments or to go through our list on these first 2 items we did. I know there's
Why
been-
don't you go ahead and do that while I get
So,
this
okay.
pulled up correctly on the
So there
screen?
were a good number of comments during Kelly's presentation for the zoning ordinance annual update. We can go through the list here. Marcia, do you have any comments relative to the first? Commissioner Franks?
I'm curious about the vesting aspect, a little more clarification on the vesting.
And the subregs.
On subregs, okay.
So, correct me if I'm mistaken, but final plats, once they're recorded with the county, that is, that's permanently recorded until a revision is made at some point in the future. So they don't really qualify for vesting because it's officially recorded at that point. Preliminary plats, on the other hand, are that preliminary, design document, and they do fall under vesting legislation by the state. And there is a certain amount of time in which the applicant has to move forward in that process to get to the final plat. Is that good?
So, I understand the best law, got 5 years to start it and 15 years to complete it, but on a recorded plat, it's not protected under the vesting?
No, it's,
Good forever.
at that point, the project is essentially complete for build-out. At that point, once the final plat is recorded, those building permits can be pulled and you can move forward at that point. Do you want to clarify anything additional? I'm not sure if I'll let
No, I
Kelly
think-
use some better language than probably how I've been describing it. I don't have anything better. What gets vested is a preliminary plat, a site plan, or a development plan. A final plat creates the lots and sets the setbacks, and that's really what it does. It states where the easements are. None of that changes once it's platted, so there's really nothing to vest. Does that answer your
Yeah,
question?
so what are you asking for?
Just to remove, there's a subsection in the subdivision regs that talks about vesting for final plats, and it's just an error. So we
Oh,
need to
okay.
remove it so that it's no longer there.
Okay. And then I had another question.
Sure.
On the screen porch. So currently, there are detached garages and things like that are built right up to the property line throughout the city in certain places or very close. What is that minimum setback you're proposing? Rear setback?
So if they're detached, they're an accessory structure, and accessory structures have generally a 5-foot setback from side and rear yard property lines. The principal buildings have a little bit more setback, so they're not right up.
Right.
The theory is that the accessory structure is smaller than the main structure of the house, so there's a little more flexibility in the rear yard to have an accessory structure where the principal building should have setbacks all around it, an open yard area for single-family residential.
Will that stay in place accessory at 5 foot then?
Yes.
And then what if you built a pool and you had a cabana and a pool house? Is that going to be affected by the rear setback? If it's not attached, if it's detached, a lot of people build a pool and have a cabana at the end of it that's not attached to the house.
So that would be an accessory structure and fall under the accessory structure
On the 5
setbacks,
foot.
not the ones that I was talking about tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Commissioner McLemore, any comments?
You don't skip me.
I'm sorry, Scott.
Just because I haven't pointed out. I have a question for Victoria regarding so the way I'm understanding, property owner that has property in the city of Franklin currently go to the county and get it subdivided without going through the city first?
It's possible, particularly over 5 acres, but we want to clarify that just because someone can take a deed to the county and get it recorded doesn't necessarily mean that it's a buildable lot according to city standards. So that's all it's doing, is it's kind of putting everyone on notice that just because someone could do that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a buildable, developable lot.
I would hope the county would redirect them back to the city if they tried to do it. But I see why you're doing it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Kelly. Commissioner McLemore?
I think I've already said all of mine
Okay.
as we were going along.
Yeah, I just had, on the zoning update, I just had a question if anything more had been looked at for dark sky requirements for street lighting. I know there's a lot of wonderful things in there. I know previously, with the conversation with Middle Tennessee Electric, they have a wide variety of a catalog, but they do have quite a bit of lights that are dark sky friendly. So I just wondering if the city would adopt something using the lights that are already out there for street lighting.
We
So
got
a lot
that,
of,
don't we?
a lot of our lighting has cutoff and shielding requirements for site lighting.
Yeah.
Street lighting is really regulated by Middle Tennessee Electric, and so we don't have the purview or authority to require different streetlights than what they might allow for or require. So it's something that Middle Tennessee Electric would need to adopt a certain
So
dark
really
sky
it's
compliant
on
light
their
fixture.
side. Then I think the only other comment I would have on that is currently in the zoning ordinance where we're showing pictures of street lighting is to maybe eliminate the picture of the one that's like the worst culprit, just in lieu of something maybe from their catalog that is giving a better example.
Sure, we can look at that.
Okay. Alderman Berger, no more comments? Alderman Martin, do you have any comments? Okay. Is Alderman Blanton, or is Brenda here? No?
She's back over there.
Okay. You're good? Okay. Alderman Shore. Mayor Moore, Mayor, any comments?
comment, but I think Marsha Allen. Call her Alden.
Yeah, yeah. Been there, done that.
Yeah.
Commissioner, Chair, I do have a comment or question. Existing neighborhoods, one of the things I have a question about, and I had called in, I think I talked to maybe Emily. Look at building and infilling existing older subdivisions with no HOA or anything like that. Just want to kind of put a bug in your ear when you're looking at this for next year or whatever. You know, we pay a lot of attention when we're talking about compatible buildings and all of that. And I had a question where there is a house being built. When someone comes in and builds a house and you have one-story established 60-year-old neighborhood and someone comes in and stacks in a 3-story house and just totally out of character with the neighborhood and things like that. Something we might want to look at. I know we make the neighborhoods comply with our no garages, no front-facing garages. We make them comply with all of that. But something to just look at, you know, protecting our older establishment. And I was just surprised to find out that there is no, when someone comes and applies for that, there's nothing that prevents that. Having a 100-foot house in a neighborhood where everyone else has, you know, well, anyway, just something to look at. Protection of older neighborhoods. We pay so much attention to fine-tooth combs with our newer neighborhoods and all of that. No protection for existing neighborhoods that have been there for 60 years.
Those older neighborhoods and the character of those neighborhoods are really important to preserve and make sure that change is managed over time. The ordinance does have transitional feature requirements that cover the height, and even that, with the newer ordinance, that's built into the zoning districts themselves. The R4 district covers a lot of the historic residential area down into Adams, out to Rolling Meadows, so that new buildings should only be half a story taller than the average on that block face, at least at the front elevation. So there are some tools in place to make sure that new single-family residential is in keeping with the character of the neighborhood.
We'll talk after. I'd like you guys to drive by and look at something. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Does anyone have any other questions about the subdivision regulations? We've had some questions on those. Seeing none, Emily, will you proceed then?
Be glad to. So tonight, I'm going to run through a little bit about the Williamson County Growth Plan update, and then Andrew's going to come up to discuss some of the existing plans and documents we have and some of the internal working group dialogue that we've had to get to a working draft of our proposed boundary. It is a working draft. I know it's been passed out. It is very subject to change, so don't get too bogged down in that quite yet. Let's focus on the beginning of the presentation real quick. This is a repeat for several of you. We presented this information briefly at a BOMA work session, and then again at the community kickoff meeting. So I won't spend too much time on the beginning, but I wanted to make sure that the planning commissioners and anyone else in the room that hasn't heard it had a chance to kind of get up to speed. Well, there we go. So just a little bit about the growth plans in Tennessee. The state has mandated a countywide growth plan, which established the urban growth boundaries around all the municipalities in the county, the planned growth areas that are within the county outside of the municipality's urban growth boundaries, and rural areas within the county. Those are kind of the three different areas that actually go onto the county growth plan map. Our current growth boundaries were adopted in 2001 when this originated, and it hasn't been updated since that time. So this is really kind of the first time we've had to look at it. It's been 20 years. TCA does prescribe the procedures for amending the growth plan, and that includes one big part, which is the coordinating committee. This is a map of the existing growth plan. I will say that our mapping has come a long way since this time. The colors all represent a different municipality in Williamson County. You can see Franklin there in the orange, yellow color in the center of the county. The lighter orange represents the city limits at the time in 2001 when this was adopted. And that brighter orangish yellow color represents the growth boundary that was established in 2001. You can also see a couple of labels up towards the northwest portion of the county, just west of Brentwood, where there were some planned growth areas, as well as there's one outgoing east of Franklin as well. They're a little hard to see, even when you're zoomed in. This is the blue area in this map represents our UGB today here in Franklin, and the yellow boundaries represent the city limits. As you can see, growth priorities have changed, as well as the pressure for annexation have definitely changed over time. And annexation law plays a lot into this as well. So as you see, we do have some satellite annexations down Lewisburg Pike. At this time, we also have annexed outside of our UGB in the Goose Creek area to the southeast part of the city. And that's because all of those were property owner led, as state law requires. The city was asked to annex those properties by the property owners. And the ones outside the UGB were conducted through a referendum process, which state law allows for. We did, as city staff, identify that we would love to open this growth plan process at that time when these were coming through, but I don't think everybody was aligned at that point in time. So now we're really open to this opportunity to kind of get our urban growth boundary to reflect where the city is likely to grow over the next 20 years. So the process of amending the growth plan, just generally, any municipality or the county has certain obligations if they're going to amend its UGB, planned growth areas, or rural areas. There are certain public outreach obligations as well as certain technical studies that have to be completed. We're in that stage right now of going through those technical studies and doing our own public outreach. After all those tasks are completed, a letter is sent to the county mayor to convene the coordinating committee. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. But ultimately, the process of updating the urban growth boundary and the county growth plan concludes with approval by all the municipalities and county legislative bodies voting to approve it, and then it moves on to the local government planning advisory committee, which is called the LGPAC, and that's at the state level. Yes, and Alderman Berger serves on that committee. The coordinating committee is formed, let me specify, she serves in the LG PAC. The coordinating committee is formed to review and consider any amendments to the UGBs and those amendments to the county planned growth areas and rural areas. The coordinating committee is required to hold at least 2 public hearings prior to finalizing its recommendation. And then the membership of this group is established by Tennessee Code Annotated. It includes representatives from the county, each municipality, and as the largest municipality being Franklin, we have additional seats as well on that committee. Middle Tennessee Electric, the Soil Conservation District, the largest utility provider gets a seat, which at this point has been identified as City of Franklin Water Department. So we also have an additional seat there. The Chamber of Commerce and Williamson County Schools also serve on that coordinating committee. Once the coordinating committee is convened, it only has 6 months to present a revised growth plan to the municipalities and county's legislative bodies. So it does move quickly once the coordinating committee first convenes. Again, we're in this prior to the coordinating committee stage right now. So some of the things that we're going through right now are listed here in the state law requirements. Essentially, I'm not going to read through everything, but we do have to hold 2 public hearings at the local level. We are planning to have those in the beginning of 2022 at this stage, assuming everything moves along at the timeline that the county has established. We'll develop and report on population growth projections, and we have been analyzing the current cost and projected cost of core infrastructure, services, and facilities that would be necessary to facilitate development in the proposed growth boundary and the city limits today through redevelopment. We've looked at the need for additional land that would be needed for residential growth, industrial or commercial development as well, taking into account where we have vacant land or redevelopable land within the city limits, as well as into the UGB and where we would grow into over time. Then we also are looking at the agricultural lands, forest, recreational areas, wildlife management areas, all those environmentally sensitive properties, and how the growth would impact those properties as we grow outside our current boundaries. And all of these are requirements set up by TCA as we're going through this growth planning process. Some of the general principles also that state law outlines for our urban growth boundary is that we identify territory that is reasonably compact, yet sufficiently large enough to accommodate the growth we anticipate for residential and non-residential over the next 20 years. We identify territory that's contiguous to our existing boundaries where we could grow. State law for annexation does impact this ability somewhat due to that we are reliant on property owner requests for annexation. So how we grow in a contiguous manner, that's a little bit more difficult to predict this time around than it was in 2001. We identify territory that would likely be the site of high-density commercial, industrial, residential growth over the next 20 years. And we also identify the territory where our municipality is better able or prepared to provide services to this land than other jurisdictions. And then ultimately, we come to that similar one where we look at those environmentally sensitive areas, agricultural lands, wildlife management areas, and really look at the impact as we grow and what happens as we grow outside of our current city limits into the UGB and what that impact is. So what does all this mean for Franklin? Well, we've had an internal working group with departmental representatives from our water sewer department, engineering, parks, planning, fire, and administration. We meet weekly. We've reviewed all 10 of our drainage basins that are within our existing UGB, looking at the land uses that are described in Envision Franklin, using kind of our best judgment on where those land uses could change over time as well when they're in those development reserve areas. We've also analyzed the cost of extending transportation and sewer infrastructure, look at where fire stations may be needed over time, and tried to align those costs with what the land uses may be and see where it's fiscally responsible to grow in a staff recommendation manner. Where those costs really align, will development essentially pay for itself in that way? So we've been looking at that from a pretty high level, but getting into the details more and more as we meet continuously. And ultimately, these will result in some creation of some reports that are required through TCA to address all those standards I just mentioned. We have community outreach planned to continue through the fall. We had a meeting in middle of August. It was virtual, a community kickoff meeting to really go through the process. But we do have some planned outreach that's really going to be a hybrid. It's going to be in person, but also have a Zoom element. And I apologize, this Tuesday, September 21st is a correct date, but we also have made some changes to the schedule that we'll get to at the end of the presentation. We're actually planning for 4 meetings, 2 meetings on Tuesday, September 21st, 2 meetings on Wednesday, September 22nd. And we've decided to break them down in more of a geographical area for property owners who may be interested in certain areas of the city specifically. So really trying to break it down into, more bite-sized pieces to speak about where people can come for those specific areas they're interested in, or they can stay for all of the meetings. We do anticipate that we'll hold our local public hearings in early 2022. And at the end of this process, there may be potential changes to the UGB that respond to public input, infrastructure investments, growth patterns, and the cost to serve all these areas. It's a little too soon to know how it's going to shape out through the whole process because we still have a lot of feedback to receive and a lot of public outreach to do. But we have started this technical review process. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrew next to kind of talk a little bit about our existing plans and documents and how we got to the map that's sitting before you. So, Andrew.
Click. Thank you, Emily, and thank you, Board Mayor and Alderman and Planning Commissioners. Kind of to understand what's on the map that I handed out, I think a quick trip down memory lane might serve us well to better understand kind of where we're heading. As part of the Envision Franklin update, we did a suitability analysis, you all may recall, when we had an expert come into town and talked about. They did an analysis in Missoula, Montana, and it was well received by the community and the staff and the developers there to kind of steer growth and identify areas where they intended to grow over time. The suitability analysis informed the design concepts, and then as the annexation law changes kind of settled in, we started getting a lot of inquiries, which led to the annexation capabilities study in 2018. And all of these have kind of served as a foundation to where we are. The 2016 suitability analysis, when you look at this map, you see several different colors. The red and orange indicate the least suitable land to develop due to several factors, environmental constraints like floodplain, floodway, steep slopes, proximity to employment centers, proximity to arterial roadways, maybe a lack of fire service coverage. And there are a few other criteria, but those are the ones that are weighted the heaviest. The areas in dark green and light green are the most suitable. So as you will see, kind of the areas in red and orange are on the perimeter of the UGB because they're just far away from existing city services and city infrastructure. So we used that as we put together the design concepts map, and at first, we looked at those areas and we thought about assigning them single-family or mixed residential or conservation subdivision. But as we thought more about it, we didn't want to mislead property owners and developers thinking these areas were teed up for development, because they're not, because of the infrastructure, lack of fire, just just the location of them being so far from the existing city limits. So we put them in development reserve, which is, has a policy of 1 unit per 2 acres, extremely low density, and it's sort of a holding pattern until growth starts to come out this way. But with the change in the annexation laws and how we serve properties, and how we ask developers to extend infrastructure, it's difficult for some of these properties that are 2 miles, from city limits, or a mile even, or even less. In 2018, we were getting annexation inquiries all over the UGB, in the west, in the Goose Creek and Mays Creek, along Columbia Pike towards Thompson Station, and it was sort of difficult to react to them and respond to them. So we took a step back and did this annexation study, and we did it by drainage basin. What essentially came out of that was we identified the basins as either a short-term, long-term, or mid-term capability, short, mid, long, and we based that on developable acreage, future land uses, ability to provide services, magnitude of investment. There are 2 areas that you'll see that are short-term, the West Basin, out 96 West, and then the Goose Creek area. One of the problems with the Goose Creek area is that the UGB and the city limits are mostly one and the same down there. There's not a lot of, it just ends abruptly. And that's an area that we've seen a lot of growth, and we've annexed the last couple years. So as we look forward and look at what a new UGB could look like for Franklin, we have some guiding principles. There are about 10 of them here, and they generally align with state law and what state law prescribes. Coordinated growth planning with Williamson County and all the municipalities in Williamson County. So all the other cities are undertaking a similar process. Some of them don't plan to make many changes. Some of them do. We want this to be a transparent process. We want people to get involved if they want to be involved. We want to have a very transparent process to put this information out there so everyone's comfortable with the proposal as it moves through the process. State law prescribes a planning horizon for 20 years. The group that's starting to meet has asked, well, maybe let's look at some 10-year horizons and some 20-year horizons. So we'll see how that evolves. Another principle is future growth in coordination with the municipality's vision for growth and use of population forecasts. Efficient and fiscally sustainable delivery of municipal services, infrastructure, and public facilities. We are, as staff, as our internal working group, we've weighed that pretty heavily. If we can't efficiently and fiscally and serve it in a fiscally responsible way, then that's kind of a red flag for us. Resource protection, creating a distinct regional form, so each city kind of has its own distinctiveness about it. And then the possibility of some interlocal agreements as part of this process, which I think that kind of remains to be seen, but there's some openness to that. So all that to say, I'd like to walk you through the working draft that we're sharing with you tonight. You'll see on this map there are some areas in red, some areas in green. The areas in red we're recommending to be removed from the urban growth boundary. The areas in green would be areas that we're recommending be added to the urban growth boundary. There are 4 areas in red, so I can hit on those first. I'll start in the West Basin, where the new Highway 96 road label is on the map. The Gentry Farm and the Harding Ventures property are showing removed. Both of those property owners have come in and asked for sewer availability denials just this year. The Harding Ventures property seeks to develop an equestrian community in the county, and the Gentrys would like to remain a generational working farm. So we are proposing to remove them from the urban growth boundary. When you go a little bit to the south of there along Carter's Creek Pike, this is what we call Southwest Basin 1. We are proposing to remove the majority of that basin except for where the future, and I say future, I have no idea if or when this will happen, future Mac Hatcher would go through that area. So we have kind of carved around Mac Hatcher. So we would remain, we would keep that in. And there would be a fairly major intersection at Carter's Creek Pike and Mac Hatcher, and we would foresee some development interest there and would want to control that, so we've carved that out. But everything else, we feel pretty comfortable letting go. There's a lot of conservation areas, steep slopes. There hasn't been a lot of development interest over the years. There's a development across from where Halfway Market used to be called Southall, and they inquired about maybe annexing, and it just didn't make sense for them to do that. So that property developed in the county, and there are a few other larger tracts, but they have a lot of conservation areas, and it's so far to extend sewer. You don't see this as a viable area to grow. As you go south along Columbia Avenue, there's one large tract we've shown in red right there, and that is the property owner also owns the tract directly to the south that's in Thompson Station's either city limits or UGB. And we didn't really like the idea of a property owner having half his property in one jurisdiction and the other half in another. And given the proximity to Tollgate and other areas already in Thompson Station, we're recommending that we let that go. And I would imagine Thompson Station would be very interested in that. As you go to the east, you will see what we call the Mays Creek Basin along Highway 96. And this is an area that I think we've all given a lot of thought to over the years. Staff gets periodic sewer availability denial requests for Mays Creek, so it's often a topic of conversation in our department. And there are a few areas in the northern reaches of Mays Creek that are in the city limits, so we respect that. We've recommended carving those areas out, and also carving out the area along Highway 96 where Market Street will intersect with 96, and then the North Chapel Road intersection along Highway 96. So you'll see there's a little bit of a cutout along Highway 96. And that could get picked up, and I don't want to speak for water, and if you have questions about that later, we can answer them. But there is a little bit of capacity to bring that out of the Mays Creek Basin into the Watson Branch Basin, but there's not that much capacity to do that. But enough for a commercial node. And then also, the boundary is Trinity Elementary. We have reached out to the county schools, and they potentially would be interested at some future date of connecting to our sanitary sewer system as they have done in the past with some of their schools. So we're sort of anticipating that, and that would be the easternmost part of the UGB, would be Trinity Elementary. In order to serve Mays Creek with sanitary sewer, it would require significant investments that we just haven't been able to overcome and don't anticipate overcoming. That's honestly probably the biggest driver of this. And I know we'll probably want to come back to that. The area in green is the Goose Creek area. In the last couple years, we've annexed over 800 acres in the Goose Creek area. There's been a lot of interest to develop in this area. We're recommending extending the urban growth boundary to follow the Goose Creek drainage basin, because right now the line does not follow the basin. So we're recommending extending the UGB to include the entire Goose Creek basin. And then just to the north, the northern part of the green along Long Lane, that's just a lot to say right there. But as you go east on Long Lane and you go past Foxglove and you go past the last part of Ladd Park, the UGB and the city limits are pretty abrupt. They just end right there. But as some of these roadways get extended, like Carruthers, like Goose Creek Bypass, as more development starts to occur down there, we think that this would also be a likely area to experience some requests. And Water has done some analysis and believes there to be not a lot, but some capacity to be able to serve the areas along Long Lane as you go east. And that's a different basin. That's not the Goose Creek Basin. That's an unidentified basin that we've picked up that has some developable acreage, but also some environmental constraints. So, just to wrap things up, we've met through the summer with our working group. We've looked at different areas. We feel like this is a pretty good working draft. We think it represents an area that the city can serve over time. Not probably tomorrow, but potentially over time. And I'll stop talking and turn it over to you, Chair, and I know you guys probably have a lot of questions.
So one that just jumps out at me, the 20-year period of planning period, how instrumental is that in decisions we make relative to adding to the urban growth boundary or removing from the urban growth boundary? Is a decision to take areas out keyed toward that 20 years and the expectation that we won't really do anything in that area anyway in a 20-year period? Would it be subject to adding back 20 years down the road or something like that?
Yes, sir. So state law does, they have in the code written, 20-year planning horizon. So we are to some degree bound by that, but who can really predict what's going to happen in 20 years? So, we're using our best guess based on, infrastructure, services, growth trends, land suitability, likelihood of development occurring in some of these areas based on planned infrastructure. Some of these areas, like Southwest Basin 1 out Carter's Creek Pike, very little has changed in the last 20 years in terms of, they're not really any closer to coming into the city limits than they were 20 years ago. So.
Great, thank you. So we will go through the list. Commissioner Allen, do you have any questions or comments?
Thank you so very much. One of the things that I really, really want to make sure that is in the record and people pay attention to, that I really get nervous about, and I'm so glad we have such a competent staff. There are so many cities around this state that even when I sit on this board were hurting financially and are still hurting financially, even when the state was hurting financially so bad that they were talking about instituting an income tax. But the city of Franklin has been so blessed that sometimes we forget that local municipalities really don't have many options about raising money. And Cool Springs has been our godsend. But really and truly, retail sales have changed. Internet sales, and a lot of malls are sitting empty. Sears is closed. JCPenney's is talking about closing. Castronot's gone. A lot of these millennials don't even know what Castronot's is. So we've got to be so very careful. And when I looked and saw efficient and physically sustainable delivery, I went to kiss you, okay? We've got to be so very careful that when we're looking at growing and extending our UGB, that we got to make sure that when we bring in these areas that we can afford to service them. Extending sewer lines and all, that's very, very expensive, but we're bound to do that. And we're bound these 2-inch county roads and all of that. When we bring in the city, we got to make them safe. We got to curb and gutter and all that. So I just want to make sure that we understand that although Cool Springs has been our godsend, it's not guaranteed that it's going to be, as we have, people changing the way they shop and all of that. And I just want to commend staff for looking at that and making sure that we don't get so gung-ho about that, and we just gotta make sure that we, as we're annexing, that we keep that in mind, that we've gotta fund this, and we don't have taxing ability that state and federal governments do. Thank you, I just wanna make sure we keep
Great,
that
those
in
are-
mind.
Those are good points, Marcia. I'm going to call on Alderman Berger. Do you have some comments you wanted to make?
Thank you, because I have to leave, be somewhere else. I'm sorry. Thank you very much. I just had a quick question, and I don't know who needs to answer this. I'm not putting this all on you, Andrew. We talked about, you had a note in there, consideration of cooperative agreement to approach management growth through interlocal agreements. And I thought, as we're talking with them, Mayor, you've been in these meetings too, the growth boundary, when we talk interlocal agreements, are we even considering any kind of interlocal agreements with the county? I mean, what services would that be? Shared services, shared resources, everything from sewer to probably water quality management, maybe, I don't know, law, fire, emergency services, cost sharing of projects maybe, bonds, things like that. I was just wondering, interlocal agreements, are we even talking about anything like that? Would we consider that with the county through this?
Well, we've had a number of
Oh, here.
interlocal agreements with the county already, and certainly the most recent one is Fire Station 7 down in southeast Franklin. So we're always looking for those opportunities. Maybe your suggestion we look a little more intently to create more cost savings is appreciated.
Yeah, I was looking to, that was the key word, cost sharing and cost savings. So the only other thing I would mention with Mays Creek, I know you said you don't, we have not overcome or we don't anticipate, certain things with Mays Creek, but one thing I think is really important that we have to look at is that area at Trinity School, because they have a lot of land out in front of that school that can be developed where they can expand that school. And one of the things is they wanted to expand to middle school or expand their elementary school there, and they could not because they have no sewer. So I think it's really important that we look at that area and keep that in mind. That's all the comments I had on that, but thank you.
And if I could just mention before you have to leave, so everybody can hear this, one thing specifically we have been working on with the county, while we haven't spoken specifically about interlocal agreements yet, one thing we have been working with them is kind of telling them what we're anticipating as we go through this process and sharing our working draft with them, and where we are currently looking at potentially having some area removed from the UGB, talking to them about what happens with that area in the county. Does it become a planned growth area, or does it, become a rural area? And making sure that they're prepared and we can work with them to identify what happens on the fringes of these areas. So I will say we are working closely with them as much as we can, but we don't have a lot of interlocal agreement area yet. Or any information on that, but we are looking at what will be planned growth areas and rural areas if this continues. Now, we do anticipate changes through the public process, so we haven't nailed down anything finally yet.
Yeah, I was thinking, especially for that area at Trinity School and, making sure we could work with the county on that, because I think it's important that we get sewer out there for them eventually, because they do need to utilize that land. They haven't. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
And when I did reach out to the schools, they said they do not have any plans for a middle school on the Trinity site, but they do farther east for they do have plans for a new middle school in the area, just not on that site.
Right. Okay, sure. Commissioner Franks, do you have any comments or?
Yes, Andrew, I scrolled back to the sustainability analysis, if you want to put it up, where it has the most suitable in color-coded.
Yes, sir, in dark green.
Yes, and, when I look at this and then when I look at that, it seemed like there's a whole lot more land that you let go because of all the constraints with the infrastructure and development and slopes and stuff like that. So how did you just choose the one little piece of property down there toll gate. I know it's the proximity to toll gate and the fact that you got two owners, where the owner owns land on both sides, but toll gate, I mean, Thompson Station would probably love to have a little bit more of that red area on that map.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's an area we've discussed a lot, and that was one of the areas that we internally highlighted, you know, as a maybe.
Yes, sir.
Just weren't quite sure what to do with it. So for now,
Yeah.
we've shown as keeping it. There are some large tracks down there. There are a handful of very large tracks that, you know, potentially if they get packaged together, you know, maybe it could work. But that I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add, but.
Yeah, I would just say this kind of goes back a little bit to Roger's question too about that 20-year horizon. Down Columbia specifically, and as you go south, just directly south of the central part of the city, we know that there's a lot of constraints right now to providing sewer service or having adequate facilities in the near term. There's a lot of questions about where it falls in the time frame, and it could be within 20 years, but this may be one of those areas that's a little bit over. But from a staff perspective, I would say one of my big recommendations has been if we're not sure, we probably don't want to give it away at this point
Well,
in
that's true.
time. So that, if I'm just being very direct about it, that's how we got to keeping it in right now. And if enough of these larger parcels do come in with annexation interest in this area, I do think we'll see that growth in the next 20 years. I don't think it will be within the next 10, though.
Well, there's certainly some growth abilities with Thompson Station under their current zoning. Whereas if it's kind of in the no man's land, whether it's county or city, and you can't provide services that, you can rest assured the county would probably love to have 2-acre lots and 4-acre lots and 5-acre lots. So it uses up some really good land through there without the ability of allowing Thompson Station to go to an R2 or an R3 or whatever they call it.
And I think as we think through
Moderate
some of
price houses is kind of what I'm getting at. If you gotta do we're selling 5-acre lots now for $1.5 million just for the land. Building a $4 million, $5 million house on them. And that's what the 5-acre initiative has done. It's run the prices just extremely expensive throughout the county. And then the 1 unit per acre, you know, it's puts a lot of pressure, and those are $1 million houses every day. So we just don't have, we all got to figure out how to handle our growth and how to provide houses, not just apartments.
Those are really good points. I think you're definitely understanding some of the things that we've been discussing internally with the points you've brought up. You know, one thing that I keep coming back to with this process is that while we want to grow and there's a lot of development pressure right now, we also want to maintain growth over the next 20 years. And sure, there's going to be ebbs and flows in it, but we don't want to kind of pin ourselves down to where we hit a 20-year mark and then we have nowhere else to grow. So I think we're trying to think about this in the long term and what's feasible for service implications over the next 20 years. But we're really trying to think both within a 20-year time frame and a little outside of that as well, because it's been 20 years since we last had the opportunity to do this process. And we don't know exactly when the next time will come up again.
Great job, Andrew.
Good. Commissioner Harrison.
No comments at this time.
And it appears to me that some of those areas to the south and west, there's obviously I guess it's the West Harpeth River that cuts through that area. And so now you're totally removed, one major drainage basin over, and it becomes much more challenging to try to create a way. As long as we're along the Harpeth, there's a system of collectors and interceptors that captures that flow and carries it to treatment plants. But once you start getting into the West Harpeth, then the challenges become almost insurmountable. Then you're looking at collecting and conveying across a major divide. So
And
Okay.
Andrew and I failed, just real quick, to introduce some of our internal working group team. But of course, Jimmy Wiseman's been helping us out along with Kevin Long in engineering and Paul Holzen, really helping us look at transportation. But somebody who's given us a whole lot of time is Brian Goodwin from our water department. Brian waved everybody. He has spent a lot of time analyzing the sewer aspects of this, so we really appreciate both them being here to help answer any questions you have.
Great, good. Commissioner McLemore?
So short-term could possibly be 10 years maybe, and long-term, well, midterm, 20 years. I wondered why the Mays Creek area was midterm, if you said it's such a long shot, and it's gonna cost so much money to get the sewer there. Why is it classified as mid instead of long?
Well, so geographically, that whole area was identified as midterm, and a lot of that reason was because some of it could be served in the short term, but then the rest of it was more long term. So we ended up making it mid, but it's really a portion of it short term and a portion of it's very long term. So if you really want to think about it in that way, what's to, through the yellow on the map really is short term. We're able to pick up some capacity, as Brian had let us know that there was some capacity identified that could go back to the Watkins branch, I guess interceptor, if that's the right term, I don't know. And then what's kind of in the orange and red would require, in 2018 dollars, I think it was calculated at 25 million to get sewer to that area, and that was a rough estimate in 2018 dollars. So don't, hold us to that today, but it's a large investment.
Right.
And for the number of properties that could develop, it doesn't seem like I'll put it this way, in order to make up for that cost, the density would definitely need to be higher, which doesn't match up with what we heard from the community on desired land uses.
Thank you.
Good. Alderman Peterson?
One of the things that I keep looking at here, and especially in some of the areas to the east that you've kind of thinking about taking out, that idea that since 2015, for anyone to be annexed into the city, the property owners must make the request. And if you've got entire subdivisions that would not be interested in that, then that can make a big difference on, getting something that's contiguous even. And we've seen a little bit of that some other places, but that is something else. But I appreciate all the work that's been done on this. It's going to be very interesting.
It is, and I appreciate you saying that, because one thing that came up in one of our internal staff discussions was exactly that with the Mays Creek Basin as you go farther out, is that because of the annexation law today and having the unknowns of which property owners will request, we also would have to come up with, the sewer lines would have to come up essentially from the southwest going northeast into this basin. And it would have to run through county right-of-way because we don't know what properties would be interested in annexation. And so it's just really difficult to navigate how we even get the sewer
Right.
to these properties with annexation law the way it is.
Good. Commissioner Williams?
I'll just say I appreciate all the thought and research that's gone into this, so.
Thank you. And Chairman, there's one more slide,
Okay.
if you wouldn't mind.
Sure.
And that's the wrap-up slide, and talk about next steps. We've asked questions. We had a virtual meeting, kickoff meeting on the 12th. We had about 50 people attend that. It was recorded. It's on the website. We're here tonight at Joint Conceptual Workshop. On September 21st and 22nd, we have community meetings, and we initially planned to do one community meeting. And about 2 weeks ago, I lost sleep thinking about how many people were going to attend that one community meeting. So I thought better of it, and we've decided to have 4 meetings over the course of 2 nights, which seems like a lot, but at least we're kind of dispersing people and getting people the information that they really care about. So we've got meetings at 5:30 and 7, and the first one's to talk about the Southwest Basins, 1 through 4, and then 7 o'clock's Mays Creek, and then the next night we'll do Goose Creek, and then all the other basins, and there aren't a lot of changes to the other basins that we're proposing at this point. And we are going to send out mailers to property owners who could be impacted by either being removed or added. So those folks will receive a mailer and a map and some information on which meeting they should attend. Those meetings will also be on Zoom and on Franklin TV, so people can attend virtually, ask questions using the chat feature or even verbally, audibly. We'd like to come back to the next joint conceptual workshop to give you guys an update. And then we are planning some open office hours for residents, citizens, property owners to come in and talk in more detail or have a more in-depth conversation if they'd like to. And of course, we can be available by appointment. And then we are planning on the October 12th, double checking the date there, October 12th, BOMA work session. And then the Williamson County Growth Plan Symposium would be on the 19th. And the county is coordinating that one, so I don't have a lot of details at this point. But they're trying to convene people from all the municipalities and talk about it. And then the next steps beyond that will be determined later. And we have a project webpage where all this information more is stored. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good, thank you, Andrew. I don't think we have any aldermen left, so is there, if there's no other business, yes.
I was just like the staff, in the zoning process, the annual zoning, they included 446 11th Avenue North, which is the Macklemore House, and 264 Natchez, which is the Mill Williams House. And the Macklemore House was zoned residential, and this was an opportunity to have the correct zoning, civic institution, and now we can put a correct sign up now, and we've been doing some remodeling there. And then 264, of course, is a whole new project, and it's residential, R6, so if everything passes by BOMA, this annual rezoning that you all have done to include those is really helpful, and we don't have to go through the process, and saving time and money, and being a nonprofit, that's really critical, and we really thank you all as staff for assisting with that.
Okay, anything else? Anybody have anything else? If not, then
Well done.
I will call this meeting adjourned.
Well done.